Yeah, Ohio is blessed, as far as I'm concerned, with two very strong portions of education, private and public.
Absolutely.
Ohio State, let's say in Oberlin, out here. What is being done in the state to promote that and to get cooperation in that stuff? So there's no duplication, you know, or whatever.
Well, it's easier to talk about the duplication issue within the public institutions, because there, with Chancellor Fingerhut, that has been one of his major concerns. That is making sure that we don't create new programs, we don't create new departments, we don't create new initiatives simply because each institution wants to have one. And then you start totaling up the overhead costs from doing that, and they quickly run out of control. But it's the same problem we have at Ohio State. We spend a great deal of our time talking about leveraging existing activities as opposed to simply creating something new. So let me give two extreme examples. Engineers all need to be able to express themselves well, right? Well, in order to do that, you don't tell the engineering school, create your own English department. What you do is you tell the engineering school, figure out how people in communications and in the English department can help your students gain the skills that they have. And that's the position, I think, that the chancellor has taken throughout the Ohio State system. And that's the position we should be taking, because we have an obligation to the citizens of this state to use resources as efficiently as possible. It's not that money comes to us and we spend it any way we want. It's to find the most effective and efficient way of using those resources to accomplish what is needed within the state. The private institutions, of course, are also getting together and discovering they can't do everything on their own, that they're going to have to get to an extent to which there's a level of cooperation. The other thing I would say is we have close relationships, as you heard in my presentation, with private universities. Case, for example, we have a number of joint programs. University of Dayton, we have a number of joint activities. That's already happening. Perhaps if there's a failing we have as higher education, it's probably that we don't articulate those relationships as publicly, as visibly as we should.
Mr. Alutto, welcome to Cleveland. Two very quick questions. The Ohio Supreme Court has ruled on at least 3 different occasions that how we fund primary and secondary education in Ohio is unconstitutional. And Ohioans are left by still voting up or down on these tax levies, school tax levies. I want to ask you, sir, which branch of government do you think got it right? The Supreme Court or the legislature for essentially ignoring the ruling? And secondly, do you think that public universities here in Ohio and elsewhere spend not enough or too much money on athletics?
I want to congratulate you. Those are 2 questions I will not answer. I definitely won't answer the first question. As to the second question, all I would say is use the Ohio State model. Make them self-sufficient. And when they're self-sufficient and can pay for themselves, then they're wonderful. But I think you're looking at, on that, I'm going to interpret your question a little bit. You can't think of athletics programs as simply athletics. It's part of creating an atmosphere for students. Intercollegiate sports is very important. One of the things, I have a little bit of a frustration with Ohio State, and Gene Smith and I get into this conversation a lot. I can't tell you the number of athletes, successful, not just in football, but baseball and golf, you name it, who have gone on then to very successful careers, not so much because of the sport itself, but because of the self-discipline they've developed, the ability to focus their energies, all of which become hallmarks of very successful careers. And I think that's the story that doesn't get told often enough. Instead, we focus on the high-profile sports like football or basketball, and we focus on a few people, and we think that characterizes all of intercollegiate sports, and therefore the question comes up, well, how large an athletics program should you have? It's far more than that. It's part of building the multiple sets of strengths and skills and values that students must have, and that's what we ought to be talking about. The financial issues are very important, and I must admit any institution, public or private, that's throwing a lot of money into sustaining a level of programming that you can't justify, that's not right. But we see it. We do see it. I can honestly say it's not happening at Ohio State, and that's a good thing to do. But again, I think you have to look at athletics as one set of activities that help develop a dimension of character that's very important to all of us, and that ought to be the focus of that question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
or good afternoon, rather. In all of your collaborations, does Ohio State collaborate with the Ohio Board of Education with all your innovations you've been talking about? Because everyone in this country is talking about the lack of raising the standards for the school systems throughout the country in public education. So as nice as it is to get into Ohio State, and I hope a lot of them will, what are we going to do about all of this, rather than just talking about it forever?
Sure. Well, one of the things that's happened, and it's happened certainly at Ohio State and most of the universities that I'm familiar with, is if you asked that question 15, 20 years ago, the response would be, well, our college or our school of education is taking care of that. That's no longer the response. There is a general sense that the difficulties being faced by public education now are at such a level that this isn't an issue for one college and a university or one school within a university. It really requires the full involvement of an institution. So at Ohio State, the issue of what do we do about curriculum, what do we do about teaching pedagogy, all of those issues are being addressed by faculty and staff throughout the university, including the physical sciences, with very close relationships with public institutions to help them develop the skills that are necessary. In fact, there's an announcement that just came out of about a $46 million grant the university received to work on developing more effective instruction, first-grade instruction in terms of language acquisition. There's a lot of close interaction, and that, by the way, that particular project, I believe, involves almost every school district in the state of Ohio. So there are very close connections that extend not just in the colleges of education, but in the arts and sciences, and I think that's going to become typical. This whole issue of K through 12 is not a college of education issue. It is a university issue to try to increase the quality of the instructional experience those students have, and therefore the developmental consequences that it has on students. Because ultimately, and I hope the message got through, ultimately it isn't just about those individual students, it's about our society. And we need to fully recognize the importance of that.
Doctor, you started your remarks today by talking a bit about civility. Mm-hmm. Could you comment a little further about what is appearing to me, at least, to be a increasing tendency to take us back to know-nothingism and reducing the lowest common denominator? And I think part of this comes out in devaluing education as a whole, and it also results in, I think, a level of uncivility in our population.
No, I agree with the intent of the question, except the way I would respond is very simple, and that is, if you have children, ask them to show you their text messages. There's no civility in those texts. I mean, they're blunt, they're in your face, they're abbreviated. They are all the things that lead to levels of interaction that don't reflect the sensitivities of the people who are involved in that interaction. So it isn't just society in the general sense of an older generation becoming less civil. It really is being, I think, reflected in all aspects of the society, which is why it's increasingly important, I think, for universities as well as K through 12 to focus on that as an issue and to have some very clear guidelines and very clear rules. We get, as provost, I get to see cases where individual students will be complaining because of the lack of civility that's taking place in a classroom or because of a particular individual. And we have to deal with that as an issue because it is very real. It's not the value system that we think is important, that we think will be a determinant of the success of our students as they go forward. So it is a general societal problem. It's one that all universities, all colleges have to deal with, but it's also a problem that has to be addressed in K through 12.